FAO. And then we're going to have presentations by Keith Cressman, who's a Senior Locust Forecasting Officer at FAO, Julian Fox, who is got 20 years of experience in forest monitoring and assessment, and Alessandra Garbero, who is a senior econometrician at EFOD. And so the three of them will present, and then we'll have discussants. Harsh, our very own Harsh, will be speaking. And then I think Chris Delgado is going to stand in for Holger, who got called away at the last minute. And after that, we'll open it up for questions. And before I pass it to Amy, let me just give a big shout out to Astrid for organizing this, and Vivek and everyone else who helped put it together. A huge thank you for this very well subscribed webinar. Over to you, Amy.
Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Good data are really paramount for solid evidence-based decision making. Yet making sure data get into the hands of decision makers is often the greatest challenge. Historically, agricultural data have been collected through agricultural censuses, farm surveys or household surveys, administrative sources, and environmental monitoring systems. Yet these sources, especially in developing countries, are often sporadic and insufficient because countries really lack the resources to collect them as frequently and extensively as needed. But there has been a spillover effect. New digital data technology has also led to significant improvements in data collection and dissemination. This has been true with the use of remote sensing, but it has also gone well beyond. With these new technologies, countries have been able to fill in gaps that in the past they were unable to afford or did not have the capacity to conduct regular censuses or surveys. This is really leading to a transformational change in data collection in agriculture. Yet collecting the data, as we know, is not sufficient. One of the most important steps is making sure that this information is used by policymakers, not just by the international community. This is often difficult as a result of fragmented data governance within countries, and also the mere nature of agricultural statistics, which often come from different ministries that have limited national coordination and communication amongst them. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of work in Bangladesh, and the government bodies who are accountable for reporting on the SDGs, for example, were not necessarily dialoguing with their counterparts in the National Statistical Office, who were the ones who were responsible for collecting the information. The Rome-based agencies, namely FAO and IFAD, are assisting member countries in unlocking that potential of innovation to drive socioeconomic growth, ensure food and nutrition security, alleviate poverty, and improve resilience to climate change. Last year, for example, FAO hosted the International Symposium on Agricultural Innovation for Family Farmers. This symposium was attended by over 500 participants, including representatives from almost 100 member countries and other key stakeholders in agricultural innovation. My understanding is that there will also soon be an Office for Innovation at FAO, which will be headed by the chief scientist, who is yet to be appointed, and will have the task of consolidating and strengthening FAO's innovative spirit. We're also working with countries to harness the power of digital technologies to pilot, accelerate, and scale innovative ideas with high potential for impact in food and agriculture, transforming digital solutions in services into global public goods. And we'll hear about some of those today. Specifically linked to data, however, programs like the Global Strategy for Improving Agricultural and Rural Statistics, which is a comprehensive framework for improving the availability and use of agricultural and rural data, has developed key guidelines and capacity development for countries on the use of digital technologies, for example, remote sensing. And then they're supporting countries on channeling this information to get to policymakers. 50 by 2030, which was presented here in this forum several weeks ago, addressed how this initiative is being developed by the World Bank, FAO, and IFAD, not only in developing innovative technologies, but on working on connecting data to policymaking. I thank you very much, and I look forward to the rest of this discussion.
you so much for that great introduction, Amy. So, ground rules are we'll ask each of our presenters to go for about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes. And then I will give a signal with about 2 minutes to go. And then I suggest only questions of clarification immediately afterwards. And then we'll go through all three presenters, starting with Keith. And after they've completed, we'll open it up first for the discussants and then for the rest of the audience. And please feel free to send in written questions through the chat function. Over to you, Keith.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Keith Cressman. As I was introduced, I have a fancy title called Senior Locust Forecasting Officer. What that means in reality is that I operate FAO's Desert Locust Early Warning System, and I provide forecast and early warning to countries that might be invaded by desert locusts. So I wanted to just, as I talk, I'll present only 3 slides. So now if I can go back to that first slide, and I'll let you know when I'm ready to move. And I wanted to start with this slide. And I don't think this is really rocket science. I think everybody can kind of work out that this is a desert locust swarm. And this is a really big one. But more than anything else, this is an example of a policy gone wrong. And so obviously the question that we would want to ask us is, well, what happened? You know, why did it go wrong? Why do we have this, enormous swarm, very, very dense? You can see it's near inhabitation, so obviously it's going to be affecting people's food supply, their livelihoods. So, how did we get here? And how can we not get here in the future? How can we avoid this? Well, obviously, what has gone wrong here is many things, many things. But one of them is fundamental, and this is, part of today's discussion, and it has to do with data, information. And desert locusts, are the world's most dangerous migratory pest. And they're the most dangerous essentially because they're super opportunistic and they're professional survivalists. They live in the harshest areas of this planet. But when it rains in those places, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, for example, they can, very quickly and rapidly take advantage of those rains, increase very rapidly as well in number, and they create these magnificent swarms. I use the word magnificent because I'm an entomologist, so I think they're really magnificent. But most people wouldn't agree with that. Now, and they move very quickly. They can move 150 kilometers a day. So essentially, they can move from East Africa to West Africa in under 2 weeks. They can cross very easily the Indian Ocean from Somalia to India and Pakistan, and they've been known to cross the Atlantic Ocean from Senegal to the Caribbean. So what all of this means, of course, you combine this fabulous kind of potential for doom and gloom, for destruction, for really impacting people's livelihoods and food security, especially those who are already vulnerable. You combine that with the time, the rapidity that the locust swarms can move, and when you're talking about information and data, then that has to be time sensitive, as well as a spatial sensitive, geographical sensitive. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So this is the area that we're trying to deal with the desert locust. And this encompasses about 20% of this planet's land surface. And somehow, within that huge remote area and increasingly insecure area, data and information has to move very rapidly from basically the middle of nowhere into the hands of decision makers. And we're not talking about, oh, maybe they'll get it, after a few days or next week or next month, or they'll read about it in an FAO annual report. No, not at all. They need to have it like tonight, because tomorrow morning, these decision makers have to decide, where the swarms are and which ones are going to be treated first. So this is extremely operational. In addition to that, this data also has to move from the country of source, may it be Mauritania or Somalia or Yemen or Iran or Pakistan, to FAO headquarters, where we operate the global early warning system. Because early warning, of course, is paramount to all of these efforts to avoid that first slide that I showed you. So in order to do this, FAO has developed some digital tools. And the first one we developed is not new by any means. It was developed 15 years ago in 2005. And that's what you see on the left-hand side there. It's kind of sitting over West Africa. This is eLocus 3. And this is essentially a rugged tablet that's connected to a satellite antenna and sends data from the middle of nowhere about the ecology, about the control operations, about the locust infestations, from the site of infestation to the national locust centers in each of these countries where the decisions are made. That works extremely well, of course. There's a cost associated to it. Whenever you send data by satellite, you have to pay for it. But this is quite reasonable if you consider the cost of vehicles and pesticides and all the other material that is used in desert locust control campaigns. However, we have found out most recently, as you know, desert locust is in the news again. With the current upsurge in East Africa, those locusts have gotten into countries that haven't seen locusts for 70 years. So they don't have these tools. So then what do we do? How do we get them tools very, very quickly? And we can't wait, for eLocus 3 to be bought and shipped and received by these countries, and especially with COVID-19, it's a bit more complex. And in addition, of course, there's no eLocus 3 units left. So we had to very quickly fast track some other developments, some other digital tools. And that's exactly what we did. And you see 3 of them there. One is a GPS satellite communicator, where we put a standard form where people can enter the basic information and send that immediately by satellite to their national centers, and it's geo-referenced. In addition, on the right-hand side, you see 2 mobile apps. One is actually a mobile app, eLocus 3M, and another is just simply a web form. And those work as well. These are collecting only the basic set of data. So it's a subset of the full set. And why is that? First of all, during emergencies, of course, people are seconded to locust operations. And so they don't have much, let's say, training or skills or knowledge about desert locusts. So we had to boil it down to something very, very simple for them to use. Now, it's really easy to make an app. And you can say, wow, this is really splendid. FAO's done a great job. But, this is only the beginning of the challenge. Because the remainder of the challenge is to get people to use the app. To first get it in their hands, to get that very necessary training, but also to get them to encourage to use the app, because they have to have something in it for themselves. They're just not going to use it. They will use it, initially out of curiosity, but that will fade very, very quickly. So it's extremely important to figure out how you're going to do that. How are you going to get people to use the app and to use the app responsibly, not just to put garbage data in and garbage data out? Because obviously this is going to have a great impact on the control operations, which then of course has an impact on the food security, on the pastures, on the crops, and the livelihoods of the people that are affected. If I can move to the last slide, please. So I just wanted to kind of show you how these tools integrate into the data flow, and this is very important, especially with the migratory pests. We focus very much on public goods, on data being available to the public, not only to FAO and our decentralized offices or to our partners, but also to the folks in the countries that are affected. So all of this means that the data flow must be extremely robust. It has to be very streamlined, very, very efficient, but also extremely useful to meet the needs of those who are either collecting the data or those who need to use that data for decisions. So on the left-hand side, you can see the 4 tools there. And then in the middle, you can see that they're all going through an intermediary cloud platform. And then on the right-hand side, in the blue, you're seeing they're going to some type of a local platform for further analysis and management. And that's usually within the GIS. So in this example of the locust countries, there's about 24 countries that have a custom GIS, a standard GIS that FAO has developed for them to use for this purpose. And of course, they're analyzing the data for their own needs in terms of planning and in terms of preparations and in terms of response. And of course, then all that data then moves up to FAO, where we're the centralized kind of global hub of the data, and we use it for our analytical and forecasting purposes. And then we took that one step further because we needed to move beyond just the servers and FAO to get that really into the public domain. So we partnered with Esri, who's very well known in the GIS world, and we have a locust hub where all of that data is there in near real time. So as soon as I get it on my servers in Rome, it then moves up to the locust hub, and it's available for people to query on maps, but also to download and use for their own purposes. So the last point then I think I want to make to keep within the time is the outputs, is the use of this data. And the initial requirement obviously is it has to be publicly available. This is no good if this data is quarantined or if it has a very long validation system or mechanism that people don't get access to the data, even if it's password protected or you have to have user accounts. We don't have any of that for the Locust Hub. This is just wide open. If people want to use this data and make products that we're doing, I mean, that's fine. Competition is very good. It will drive FAO, who is the leader, of course, in terms of desert locust monitoring throughout the world. It will drive us to continue to innovate and to improve our services to the countries. So I don't think we should be afraid of sharing data. This data is not a commercial good. Of course, there's all sorts of disclaimers, saying that people cannot use it to make money. But we should not be afraid to share that data and make that really a truly a public good. Now, if we adhere to this, and if we think, how we're going to develop digital tools, how are they going to be used, for what purposes, and how people can actually benefit, then I think there's a chance to be successful in really harnessing the power of data and information so that we can avoid the first photo that I showed. Now, it'll still happen sometimes. And when it does happen, like we're facing this year, then, of course, all of these systems become even more important, that they're robust and that they function well and that they serve their purposes. I think with that, I will stop and then give it back to the presenter. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith, for that very succinct and to the point presentation on a very topical issue. Here in the bank, we have been very concerned about this. In fact, we have a large program going to the board today on this topic of desert locusts. Julian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julian. My name is Julian Fox from FAO's Forestry Department. I lead our work on forest monitoring. I think Vivek is going to show my presentation. So, good morning, colleagues, firstly. But today I'll briefly present some of our innovative forest data collection platforms, which are called Open Forest and SEPAL. And I'll touch on the use of data in policy making for public and private sectors, which is actually the topic of a publication that we're just about to put out. So it's a very timely and a great topic for a seminar. Next slide, please, Vivek. So, I mean, I'll start with our vision. I mean, our vision is to really transfer technology and develop capacity for people, communities, and countries to monitor their own forests. This way, I mean, they can create that critical information because they're the ones that are managing the forests, and that can really help them be effective and adaptive in their management actions, and also particularly in a changing climate when things are changing quite rapidly in the forested areas. With this approach, we can also support the generation of locally relevant information, and this is really important for building ownership and trust in data and generating quality information for reporting, not only for international processes, which FAO maintains several of, and others such as the UNFCCC, but also those national processes. We've also, over the last 10 years, noticed that quality, locally relevant data and information can catalyze investments, particularly in forests and climate change. Next slide, please, Vivek. Fantastic. So over the last 10 years of FAO Forestry Department, we've been working quite hard to develop some applications and platforms, because in the forestry departments in the FAO member countries, we noticed that many of them just don't have the capacity or the platforms or the tools to understand what's happening in their forests. So in partnership with many donors and countries, we've developed what we call Open Forests, openforest.org. You're welcome to visit there and download and find out information about these applications. The idea is that the applications are easy to use and they support both field data collection through things like forest inventory, but also that really important emerging remote sensing data collection using remote sensing, the power of data that's remotely sensed. So the initiative consists of pretty much start to finish for forest data collection and analysis. Collect is it starting on the top left is a database system for survey design, data entry, data management, and reporting. Collect Mobile allows you to populate that database from a mobile device. Calc is for working with your data to create results and analysis. And the bottom three are all about remote sensing. So Collect Earth, which some of you may have heard of, is a visual interpretation tool for land monitoring. And it's built on Google Earth and uses the imagery available through there in a really easy to use interface to collect information on land cover. Collect Earth Online is the online version of that on the cloud for sort of crowdsourcing of land monitoring. And CEPAL is our cloud-based geospatial computing platform, which allows more advanced geospatial analysis for countries. So over the last 10 years, the initiative has been quite successful. I think it's been, we've had 20,000 installations in over 160 countries. And in many countries, the forestry departments are using it for all their data collection and analysis needs, which we're extremely proud about. Next slide, please, Vivek. So CEPAL is our more innovative product. It's a geospatial supercomputing platform. It has over actually 4,300 active users across the world, and it allows them to do quite sophisticated geospatial analysis in a really easy to use platform, a cloud-based platform that can be driven from a mobile phone. Many of the people that we want to target are in countries with large amount of forests, often in developing tropical countries, but with very poor bandwidth and often using simple devices. So it was important to us that they could create and undertake quite sophisticated geospatial analysis from a simple device with limited bandwidth. So this has been used in many countries to detect, illegal, unsustainable timber harvesting and even small-scale agriculture in some countries. So you're very welcome to visit cepal.io and register. It's completely free, thanks to our generous donors. And actually, just to mention, we have a nice collaborative project with World Bank's Forest Carbon Partnership Facility to develop some custom modules within CEPAL for geospatial data generation for the Carbon Fund countries, and we're working together with the bank to improve the quality of that information to help unlock some of that climate finance for forests. So it's a really exciting piece of work that we're doing right at the moment. Next slide, please. So I will turn to the specific question of this webinar. We're actually just finalizing a publication on the exact topic, and that is the use of data in policy making for both public and private sectors. We've been thinking a lot about this because we've been investing a lot in the generation of quality forest data, and we've noticed that not always does it translate into better policies or better actions. So our publication called Better Data, Better Decisions toward Impactful Forest Monitoring, we look at a number of case studies where quality forest data has resulted in policies, and we wanted to understand the characteristics of this data and the enabling conditions that resulted in this new policy. So we have a number of case studies. This is for Vietnam, a real success story actually, that's featured in the publication. In 1990, starting with a series of national forest inventories, the government basically created a policy for increasing its forest area through large afforestation projects. Some of you may know they're called 327, 661. So they used the data collected through this national forest inventory 4 cycles to first recognize the problem, create policies, and then monitor the progress of these large afforestation projects. And a really excellent example where data collected is used to create the policy and then monitor the policy, and the policy has been very successful in increasing the forest area in Vietnam over the last 20 years. Next slide, please, Vivek. The last slide relates to the private sector, and that is how advances in forest monitoring capabilities and the availability of this data through things like FAO's Global Forest Resource Assessment actually helped create an agenda from initially launched by the NGOs that triggered a corporate response toward deforestation-free supply chains. I mean, really more accurate and transparent forest monitoring data allowed the NGOs to have a real fact-based campaign against supply chains that were driving deforestation. And the corporate and then private entities have responded to this. We see in the graphic on the bottom left, since 2010, an increasing number of corporate commitments toward deforestation-free supply chains. And many of these private entities are now using forest monitoring technology to measure their own performance against these commitments because they recognize they have to answer to the public about where their products are sourced and whether or not it is driving deforestation. So these are 2 case studies from the publication. We wanted to look at the attributes of this data that triggered the policy change. There's a lot in the publication, but just to summarize, I mean, for data to have an effect, we generalize that it needs to be accessible, it needs to be relevant, it needs to be reliable and credible, and it needs to be sustainable in its collection and production. So thank you very much. If you would like any further information on this publication, which will launch in the coming months, or our work on forest monitoring more generally, I would be very happy to provide further information. Back to the host, Julian.
Thank you very much for that presentation, a very interesting presentation on forest monitoring and the associated data, Julian. Let's go to, are there any questions of clarification? Yeah, let's go to Alessandra Garbero then. Alessandra, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Alessandra Garbero. I'm part of the Research and Impact Assessment Division within IFAD, and I've been working primarily on impact evaluation on IFAD development project within the fund. I'm a methodologist by training and interested in innovative ways of data collection, but also data analysis. So I'm happy. Can you see my screen? Some highlights of this project that I led, which is titled Leveraging Artificial Intelligence and Big Data. So basically, we're moving from innovative ways of data collection, through platform and application and GIS, to innovative ways of data integration and analysis. And this project is an example. So give you some concepts. So you know that artificial intelligence is a discipline in computer science and uses computers to automate decision-making processes. And machine learning is a branch within artificial intelligence and encompasses various methods that get computers to recognize patterns in the data and then use these patterns to make future predictions. So basically, as part of this project, we did use machine learning, and basically we were able to collect large amounts of data of all kinds, repurpose this data and analyze them. This is because we wanted to uncover patterns and trends, and also primarily to predict performance. For instance, performance of IFA projects, know what are the features of projects that are likely to fail, and be able to predict this for the future. And in essence, this is important to guide future investments, and it's important for data-driven decision making. It's slow, like the transition. So in terms of, I don't know whether you can see the slides on the project objectives.
It will come. Just it takes a minute or two. So if you go ahead and keep talking, we'll get there.
All right. So in terms of the project objectives, so the project objectives basically had three main milestones. The first was to get a global overview of IFAD portfolio. We have about 100 projects in the portfolio, and starting from 1981. And so we wanted basically to get an understanding of the portfolio in order to also enhance knowledge management, know which project were more likely to work, and also be able to predict performance, where performance here can be in financial terms, but also in terms of impact. So in essence, we collected large amounts of data. As I said, about 900 projects. When I say data, this could be financial data, but also documentation. We gathered more than 1,000 documents, and these were documents of design of projects, but also project completion reports, which are basically reports that are done at the end of a project to assess performance. We brought in financial data, but also data on ratings and evaluations, cost tables, and also micro-level data from impact assessments. So project-level data, micro-level data, and we eventually also included data from the country context, from the WDI, World Development Indicators, from the bank for about 120 countries. In essence, what we using a large number of methods to analyze the data, and this was the innovation. This, I forgot to tell you that this was part of an innovation grant to basically help IFAD foster innovation and sort of have new creative ways for data and analytics. So we used in the end methodologies that are quite established, like text mining, but we integrated them with machine learning algorithms that could pick up interventions and topics within the documentation and be able to classify the project, because with the ultimate end of doing some predictive analytics, as I said, being able to predict the projects that are more successful and how to design future projects. But let me give you some highlights of this work, particularly in terms of the first point, which is the portfolio systematization, meaning learning about trends and patterns within the IFAD development projects since 1981. So this is one example of the analysis that we did. So, and particularly by analyzing textual data. So again, more than 2,000 documents. Here we wanted to basically try and report against prevalence of SDGs within the documentation, whether IFAD was increasing their reporting and how this trend was looking over time. And we did it across all the SDGs. And here you can see an example for SDG 1, and you can see the data by decades, that actually in the recent decades, which is the top graph, the top curve, we can see an increasing prevalence of reporting within documentation. So this helps IFAD monitor also what it's doing, and whether, at least in terms of reporting within text, and gives some guidance in terms of reporting against themes. We also, what we did, we leveraged on a partnership with Cornell University, and we used an advanced machine learning model basically to be able, was what I mentioned before, to classify the portfolio. What I mean by that is that we know that IFAD invests in interventions, and we have some corporate data systems that basically have brought themes, in the sense that projects are classified by, for instance, saying they concern rural development, agriculture, irrigation. But with machine learning, we wanted to have a granular view at the interventions. We wanted to see the specific interventions to which we dedicated funding, and in order to really have a global vision. And this is useful to know whether we should invest in new areas, and also link this data to performance, as I said before, or impact, to see whether these areas are particularly successful. So what we found is that we managed to find 4 main intervention classes within the documentation, meaning that IFAD seems to invest mostly in socioeconomic interventions, followed by technology, ecosystems one, and then storage. And then among which this, we also managed to get even a more granular view. For instance, here, the technology intervention, it seems that they're mostly related to crops, followed by irrigation, and then soil, and followed by energy, breeding, organic farming, and fertilizer. In terms of point, which is the predictive analytics, here we try to bring data to do 2 sorts of analysis. As I mentioned before, I work on impact evaluations, and so we collect micro-level data on rural households, on selected projects. And there we could really see, we could try and predict to what extent our projects have a positive impact on the ground, and even there, learn more about the effectiveness of intervention. The second point is about performance at the project level, and again, run some models that could tell us what are the features that really drive successful projects. Are irrigation more like effective than microcredit projects, and in which context, and what are the other successful features for design? Again, all of this is important for data-driven decision making, and that's why the validity and the usefulness of this analysis. What we did by using the impact evaluation data, and where here we really tried to predict the positive impact in a set of projects that we evaluated, and the extent to which projects were really generating an impact on the ground. And you can see that across a set of projects that are listed in the graph, we can see that the impact was really large. We have a number of projects that had impact about 50% for the beneficiaries. And so this is these are new ways to analyze the data compared with conventional methods that are mostly used. Finally, so this project is a pilot. So we're now entering a phase 2 where we're going to validate all these analyses and actually scale them up to include all possible documentations at IFAD and refine the algorithms. We also would like to launch a dashboard, then it's going to be publicly available, because again, this is going to be a public good for both IFAD and the partners to look at these characteristics of the project, but also we want to make all of this user-friendly and in order to foster data use. We're also going to analyze and possibly launch systematic reviews to assess the impact of key interventions that are crucial for the funds. And the last and most important step is that in the future, we really would like to find a way to embed this kind of analysis within corporate reporting systems in order to make this sustainable and have some sort of business continuity. Thank you very much, and over.
Thank you very much, Alessandra, for that very interesting presentation. So let's move now to our discussants. Harsh, the floor is yours. And right. Before you get started, Harsh, just a reminder to anyone who wants to ask questions, start sending them in via the chat. I've gotten a few, and then I will read them out to the presenters. Harsh, the floor is yours. Apologies.
Okay. Thanks, Julian. So what I'll do is maybe focus on 3 points, really interesting presentations from everybody. And The first point is to try and make sure that we are looking at the entire data value chain in this place, right? So to see how to go from data to information to knowledge to decision support. And in some ways, we are trying to see how to go up that chain with new ways of collecting data, new ways of analyzing it with machine learning, AI, and text mining and other things, and how to help different decisions. But sometimes it's good to also start from the other end, because as the title for this goes, how do we actually, what decisions do we want to help influence with these systems, right? So whether it be on agriculture, forestry, whether it's better MRV systems that can be used, or better locust adaptation systems, or preparedness activities, or better benchmarking of areas so that people can see how well they're doing on various agriculture, forestry type things, to try and focus more on the decisions and which kind of policies can be impacted and so on. So it'll be great if, as we go ahead with these kinds of activities, we can do, I think Parmesh and others also had some comments on things such as, say, trying to highlight some of the use cases, for example, on these kinds of things, which could help show how all of these elements could contribute towards better decision support. So that's one thing if we can do, because otherwise we can get lost in the data and the cool analytics, because we all have been guilty of that in the past, right? As to try and think about where all this is going. The second big thing is, I think, to recognize from what's been presented, a lot of the potential for new types of technology to be used in these aspects. So how it's going from very single-use type technologies to now leveraging a whole range of things, like we heard in the collect type ecosystem, the forest, open forest type ecosystem, how everything from Kobo toolbox to satellite imagery to using Google Earth Engine analysis to data visualization apps, portals, all these kind of things are all being used together in new ways. And this is a really rapidly moving area, and this is where it's probably going to be more and more the case that we'll all, through our institutions, have institutionalized versions of these. For example, in the World Bank, we've been working closely with the ITS, which is our IT group, to develop a bank geospatial portal, which most people in the bank haven't used yet as well, which has a lot of capability built in terms of using Google Earth Engine APIs and looking at high resolution satellite imagery, not only from free sources, but also from newer high resolution sources that are out there. And this is where there's probably a lot of scope for trying to see if we can bring in some of the more machine learning AI type things, which Alexandra mentioned, into the fore a little bit more, because that is the future in terms of being able to throw lots of data at things and estimate things that you think were hard to estimate before. But the one challenge there is you need something to train that data. So this is where to have some kind of global platforms for training data, so that we can help encourage more countries to start putting more data in the public domain, or in some cases just buy the data or buy subscriptions, such as higher resolution satellite stuff from Planet or Maxar or any of these things, to go in and do what we would have done on a more case-by-case type basis. So the more automation we can do on this, the better on these, so that we can actually get a low-cost ways of doing this, whether it be for low costs or whether it be for agriculture, forestry, other types of applications, right? And that leads me to the last point, which is on seeing how we can all work together to reduce the barriers of entry on this. Because even simple things like requiring registration and other things and all that, even if it's free, are all barriers to entry. So to try and see if we can try and work on ways in which you can provide more open services as part of a open services catalog, which FAO has already done a great job on, and many UN and bank and other agencies also doing a lot along these lines. And also to see how you can use a lot more of these open analytics as well, for both analytics and data visualization and a lot of the data science type activities that are there, so that you can also organize ways of bringing in new stakeholders into this work, such as people like hackathons, or to have people from other agencies and CSOs and others join the forum and leverage each other's data, for example, to see how we can combine some of the work that's being done in FAO with some of the work in, let's say, the WRI, GLAD alerts, and all of these kind of things, and make even richer data and analytics and interpretation come out of this. So slowly moving from retail level work where you're working country by country or project by project to more wholesale level systems, which can be leveraged by everybody and made part of their own portals as part of these systems. So these are things in which we can try and maybe explore how to highlight some of these use cases, add more video or other interactive documentation to help people explore all of these new areas. And this is something that we'll be happy to work with you all on these kind of activities. So I'll stop there, Julian.
Great. Thank you very much, Harsh, for those very insightful comments around the data value chain, automation, and barriers to entry. Chris Delgado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. It's really a pleasure to. It's a great gathering. It's really interesting to hear from FAO and IFAD, and we're sort of on the cutting edge of the application end of things, and many times. Now, I wanted to make 3 points quickly. One is to generally stress the difference between developed countries and less developed countries, and in the issue of agricultural digital technology and data use. Now, I think implicitly this was in all the presentations, but it wasn't brought out as much as I think it's useful, at least for a bank audience. So I want to go into that. 2, I want to just relay quickly some issues pertaining to an exercise we did recently in Africa, really looking at the critical nature of or properties of ownership of results that come from this kind of analysis, which again was implicit in some of the presentations, but I want to stress. And I'll end quickly on some points on Locust. Julian Lampietti mentioned that there's a project going to the board today on Locust on the bank side, and I don't want to belabor that, but I think there's a key lesson from these presentations for the implementation of those series of projects. So on the first, I mean, it's obvious that there are significant differences between a wealthy society and a less wealthy one in using agricultural technology. I think the point we often miss is that digital technologies themselves that use the data really often cannot be extended, adopted, or financed entirely through the private sector in developing countries. They often can be in developed countries. The data may be public, but the use of that data, which can be trillions of terabytes or whatever, the effective use of that is often something that can be privatized and used that way. That doesn't work. Now, in developing countries, I think more broadly, you can think of the issue as a transaction cost one. There are underlying failures in markets for information and credit. And what digital ag tech really does, and what makes it so exciting, is that it's a transaction cost slayer. You finally have a way of taking really a high-tech central solution, whether it's a database or advisory service or a policy planning function, and having that interact with thousands of dispersed low-tech tentacles out in the field. And that simply wasn't possible before, and this is terribly exciting. It's also the justification for public-private enterprises in digital ag technology in developing countries, because there actually is a big public good component to this that may or may not be true in the developed countries. So that's one set of points. And I might add, I really appreciate during Keith's presentation on his plea for open access to data and the concomitant commitment to training that one finds in eLocus 3, that the training of people in ministries is really critical to the use of this stuff. And that's, as I understand it, Keith, and correct me if I'm wrong, that is an important part of FAO's interventions there. So on the second point, ownership and training, the bank, AGRA, the Gates Foundation, and others recently had a partnership really looking at lessons learned since 1980, thereabouts, on why, with all the efforts to generate better data and better analysis, so little of it is used in sub-Saharan Africa in actual ag policy making. And of course, you can come to all kinds of theories why that might be, but I think the fundamental reason is that policymakers don't have the information they need when they need it in the form they need it. And that just, I won't belabor that more, but that just emphasizes the real value of having the training component at the same time as you have the data generation component, and getting that into practice with the right people. I mean, just putting it in at the technical end of research institutes just doesn't do it. Final point, and thank you for bearing with me, Julian, that's on the locust. A lot of what, as I understand it, FAO does, maybe less so EFAD, but certainly FAO, you're really the sharp edge of control on things like locust. I mean, you're really the organization that helps countries that want to control their locusts and gets the job done. This is critical. I think there's kind of a recognition in Keith's presentation that I wanted to emphasize, that you have to morph that control into other functions, such as protecting the livelihoods of the people. We have a terrible, as I think colleagues know, a terrible food security crisis around the world because of COVID, and in locust-affected areas, it's much worse. And so you have to move into social protection, then you have to move into landscape restoration. Both of those are motivated not just by humanitarian concerns, they're motivated by the fact that you want to forestall destructive behaviors. You don't want conflict in pastoral areas. You don't want people eating their seed for next year. You don't want people just upping stakes and going to the city. So there's a vital function to sort of get into the helping countries get out of problems once they've done the control. And finally, there's the need, and this is where we come back to, particularly to our UN colleagues, to prepare and learn and prevent, because unfortunately with climate change, what we're seeing in East Africa and elsewhere is going to come back again much more frequently. We have to learn the lessons. And anyway, a great set of presentations. Thank you for inviting me over.
Thank you for those insights, Chris. I mean, very important. You know, this lesson about investing early in locusts, I guess, is a pervasive one in the system. You know, that in a sense, COVID-19 could have been avoided if there had been early investments in One Health. I think you touched also on some very important points related to data ownership, as well as data equity, shall we say, and of course the importance of not just giving people data, but giving them the means to use and understand that data to achieve greater and better things. So with that, we'll now move to the question section of the event. And I see we have two questions here from Mesh. I'm going to read them out. I think it's pretty clear. So the first one, which countries are using locust forecasting for taking decisions? Can you please give us a use case? So that would go to Keith. And then I'm going to ask them in batches of 3. So if the presenters could just take note and then answer your question. So the second question is also from Parmesh. Have any of the presenters used startups and data companies for developing these products and applications? Do Do you develop this in-house or do you work with external developers? So I guess that would go to, it'd be either FAO or EFUD, but let's just say FAO to start. And so that's Julian. And then for Alessandra, where can we find out more information about this series project? So let's start with those three, and then we have many more questions rolling in. So go quickly, and we'll shift into the next batch. Over to you, Keith.
Okay. Yeah, those are really good questions. Let me start then with the first one on in terms of the forecasts. How many countries are using the forecasts? These are all of the countries from West Africa to India. So these are not only the frontline countries, which there's about 30 of those, but then the so-called invasion countries, countries that rarely see locusts. So that's another about 25 countries. So it's well beyond 50 countries that are using these forecasts. These forecasts are disseminated through monthly bulletins. I usually forecast 6 weeks in advance, but then also they're supplemented by mid-month and let's say weekly forecasts as well. An example of how a country uses a forecast. I'll give you two very real examples based on the current situation now. So most of you probably know there's a lot of locusts in Kenya and Ethiopia. The winds are moving from the south to the north over that part of Africa. And so countries like South Sudan and Sudan are very, very nervous about what to expect. So they basically rely on FAO to tell them in terms of the timing of when swarms might arrive in their country, where they might arrive in their country, and then how many might arrive in their country. And of course, they want to know that as early as possible. And I can tell them earlier, but then of course the precision sometimes can drop. So sometimes I give a warning. It may be very quick. It may be like today is Wednesday, so I might warn South Sudan that you could get locusts by the weekend. So get ready. Or it might be Sudan, you'll be getting locusts in 2 weeks, so you have a bit more time to get ready. So that's one use case. The second use case is a much a longer term forecast, and this is for a country like India and Pakistan, where in January we alerted them to the possibility that they might get swarms from East Africa at about the end of June or July. So that gives them about 5 months to take anticipatory action. And during that period, for example, the Prime Minister of Pakistan declared a national locust emergency to unfreeze some funding, and even the World Bank now is going to be assisting in terms of supporting those efforts. India, the same, and you know they do a lot of preparatory, anticipatory actions. They're ordering equipment, pesticide, fixing their sprayers, training, and you know the list goes on and on. So obviously, you know, as was mentioned earlier, it's early warning and preventive control and preparedness that are actually key in terms of fighting locusts. And then just very, very quickly, I know my colleagues from FAO will answer this as well, but those apps that you saw, we outsource app development for the eLocust suite of tools. We outsourced eLocust 3 15 years ago to Novacom, which is the public side of the French Space Agency. And more recently, then in the last few months, we outsourced eLocust 3M, the mobile version, to Penn State University, simply because FAO has a memorandum of understanding with them already, so that they were able to develop that app in less than a week. And that's phenomenal for app development, but that's, you know, how fast we have to move with locusts. We learned our lesson. I don't know if there's any of my IT colleagues on this call, but we learned our lesson in terms of internal development with the fall armyworm, which is another devastating pest in Africa. We developed a mobile app and platform initially with the internal development with our IT colleagues, but unfortunately that didn't go very well. So then we again outsourced it. In fact, again to Penn State University. Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Julian.
Yeah, I'll switch my camera on so you know I'm a real person. But yeah, very briefly, I forgot to mention, so all our applications are free and open source. So they're all on GitHub, and we have managed to, I think, harness a bit of that development community, to keep strengthening those applications in a nice way. I mean, we have our own development team actually in the forestry department. We're extremely lucky to have them. Just a couple of examples. We receive a lot of in-kind contributions on the development front. One from actually the World Bank, a current project with some applications they had developed, and for sustainability, that project was ending. We helped them move them to CEPAL so that that application could continue to be used by their countries. A second nice example is the Collect Earth Online, which was developed by NASA, a really large investment from NASA, and now we've taken that on board and are maintaining the application. And we work with a lot of universities, a lot of graduate students, master's students. One nice example is a Wageningen master's student developed a fantastic application for dense time series analysis of Landsat imagery, and we made that operational in CEPAL, and now it's used for monitoring degradation in countries, which is really at the cutting edge of forest monitoring. So we haven't used so much startups, but we do use other parts of the development community. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Julian. Alessandra.
Thanks. So just concerning the CERES 2030, so this is an initiative that has been funded by the Gates Foundation. It's collaborating with IFPRI. There is a website where you can refer to that it's quite explanatory. In the context of our partnership, what we did with them was primarily to leverage on their database, because as part of CERES, basically what they try to do is to evaluate agricultural interventions that could contribute to SDG 2. And as part of this, we collected more than 500,000 basically articles that in the domain and publications in the domain of agriculture. So we leveraged on this database to be able to apply also the machine learning algorithms and being scaled up to our basically documentation. This is for CERES. As part of the question concerning whether we use a startup or we did it in-house, so this was a small pilot, and pretty much we did everything in-house because we wanted to demonstrate also the sustainability of this and the internalization of the knowledge, but also because I think for this kind of applications, it's very important to keep interdisciplinary teams, because data scientists, I think, need to work in collaboration with economists, statisticians, but also expert domains, and in order to better interpret the data, understand the data, and also use the data. So, and also qualitative experts. Over.
Great, thank you very much. So let me put forward some more questions. We have a question from Astrid, which is how is data quality ensured in the different applications? And then we have a question from Doda. Considering the low level of education of most small-scale farmers in West Africa, using some of these new digital tools can be a daunting challenge. What do you think are some of the measures in place to raise the education levels of farmers to improve their use of these tools? And we also have a question from Claire. Linked to the previous question, do you think these tools are an opportunity to create new jobs for professionals as surveyors or agricultural advisors, and for new training and capacity building? Let me see. And then there's a number of inputs from Harsh. I'm going to give you a couple more questions here. So Harmesh notes that the World Bank is working with Microsoft to develop digital and data internships. Then Kartik has a question. What format of data is captured by eLocus 3 and other devices? Is there any image processing functionality on, say, crowdsourced pics or crops clicked by farmers? So that has to do with the form of data collection. Passing it back, why don't we just go ahead and do the reverse order this time and start with Alessandro and then go to Keith and end with Julian.
Okay, thank you. I will address the question of data quality, which I think is very important in the context of the presentation I gave. So data quality is an important aspect of any analysis, but particularly for machine learning, because as we know, the large amounts of data may be less subject to data validation or data checks, right? So mindful of this, actually, we did a lot of data cleaning, but also as part of phase 2, we plan to extend the cross-validation with other data sources. Bringing in also a component of human checks, because I'm a strong believer that AI can substitute humans, and you still need humans for certain kind of tasks. And so we really need to triangulate the data with other sources, also for the reliability of the data, what has been found. And so as part of phase 2, we'll have a further look at all these aspects. Also, another important aspect in machine learning is that the fact that algorithms are really sensitive to the quality, and sometimes they can be even gender blind. So, I mean, data, I mean, some sort of quality checks or random checks need to be done, and attention to these aspects are really now more and more debated in the arena. And that's why the next steps of the project will be devoting a lot of time to data curation. Over.
Thank you, Alessandra. Over to
Yeah, I think what, just continuing on the data quality, what Alessandra said is actually excellent. And she in fact encapsulated most of the things that I wanted to say. But it's very interesting because, when we shifted from, or when we increased our digital tools, such as the mobile phone app, which, anyone can download from Google Play Store or the App Store for Apple. This opens up, let's say, a lot of possibilities for reducing the quality of the data, because it's basically anyone can use these apps and they can transmit data, and they might not know anything about what a locus is, and this sometimes I'm even sad, that we opened up these apps, because we have a very let's say a very strong database, a very robust, high quality database from that eLocus 3 tablet, because because only trained people were using that device. So it comes always back to training. I think training has a very important link to data quality, but then we can also harness things like artificial intelligence that people have mentioned already today. Especially if the app allows you to take a photo of something, and so of course the mobile version of eLocus 3 allows people to take a photo or photos of the locus infestation, and then we can turn to AI to help filter out what's not a locus and what is a locus. But this is critical. And as we crowdsource information, we do risk, reducing the quality of the data. So we have to find, technologies that can help us. But as also Alessandra said, there's also the human element. And we have to consider that, because obviously we want to have a very, very strong and robust database of high quality data. So that's just a few words on quality. I see these digital tools as a great way to encourage the new generation of people to get involved with desert locusts. I mean, nobody wants to work in desert locusts. If you're in the Ministry of Agriculture, it's like the last stop before not working at all. It's like you're getting punished. You have to control operations that are ongoing with desert locust control campaigns and early warning will help to encourage kind of a new generation to come up through the ranks. In terms of the eLocus 3 format, the tablet, the original one, which is the robust, and that has the complete data set. Yeah, this essentially is the survey officers or the control officers in the team. They are just simply making choices from buttons on the tablet. They're not entering any data themselves apart from just the name of the location, but there's no other text entries. So again, it keeps the data very, very clean. They're not having to select from drop-down menus because that's extremely tedious, especially under 50-degree weather and blowing sands. So they just simply have to tap what they see. So if they see locust hoppers or adults or copulating or flying, they simply just tap those things, and that's how they enter data. They of course can take photos that are georeferenced that then are saved to their device, because otherwise, sending photos by satellite is a very expensive undertaking. So we try to build an interface that's extremely easy to use, and that is also very quick to use. We don't want someone standing, under the hot sun for 20 minutes having to enter pages and pages of data. But again, coming back to the issue of education, training is critical. So it's easy to make a complicated app. It's really, really challenging to distill that into something very simple but very powerful and easy to use. Over to you.
Thank you, Keith. Julian.
Yeah, I actually think most of it's been said very nicely by Keith and Alessandro, but yeah, capacity development is key. And I mean, most of our stakeholders are in the ministries, they're state agencies, and then you can control the quality of the data through, developing standard operating procedures, through capacity development, technology transfer. One interesting thing we're trying to do at the moment is, as Keith alluded to it, is to invoke more citizen science. And then I think quality is may become an issue. I think it would be really interesting to think about how we can engage, that broader non-state stakeholders to provide data and information, because there's a lot of activities going on in many sectors now that are non-state, and how to help them develop quality data and report that data. That's a really interesting question for us at the moment. Back to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a license of the chair here to ask a question of my own, and then I see two more questions that have come in. One of them is very specific. So let me first ask my question, and then I'll ask those two questions. So this is to all three of the panelists, and it has to do with an issue we've been struggling with a little bit in the bank. So the data that we use are often data that are based on public origin, say satellite data of different kinds, and then involve a lot of private third-party algorithm design to make them valuable and interpret, and then those data are provided and purchased by an institution like the World Bank, then provided on a free advisory basis to governments and others, but in a fairly limited fashion, because the data are proprietary to the company that developed the algorithm to process them. And so the question is, should those companies be charging institutions like FAO or the World Bank to access their data? And at what point should those data become pure public goods? And at what point should the very innovative capabilities of the private sector be encouraged in terms of developing all these new algorithms, but for public uses, right? So there's this division between when and where the public and private sector comes in and how the data are used by whom, that I'd love to hear your insights into. Then getting back to the other two questions we have. So Ulawesi from Nigeria is asking a question to Alessandra from IFAD. There's a project using big data. So there's an E-funded project, YESA, to train rural youth in agricultural value chains in only 2 states in Nigeria are allowed to apply, and he'd like to know why neighboring states can't apply, as they have some issues. And then the second question is from Sei Ladipo, and is how can big data and AI determine the impact of projects like this and also make improvements? So let's start with Julian this time. Julian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, on data, on the ownership of the development. Yeah, I mean we've removed all dependencies from our development chain. So this was lessons we learned early on. Some of the best software for, say, geospatial analysis is commercial, but the licenses are often expensive, and particularly for sustainability issues in the countries we support, they often cannot be afforded after the project's finished. So all our code is open, and we don't rely on any commercial developers or commercial software. Maybe that we could have pushed the innovation barriers a bit more if we had worked more with commercial developers, but we wanted to not have those dependencies that you mentioned, Julian. But we do receive in-kind contributions from the commercial development providers and also data providers, because they see this the exposure of their code or the exposure of their imagery as a good way also to advance their business models. We have removed all those commercial dependencies from our code that's available, say, on openforest.org.
Thank you, Julian. Let's go to Alessandra.
All right, I'm going to try and address the questions related to the impact evaluation on IFA-funded projects. So I would like to clarify that machine learning is an additional tool, and to evaluate the impact of a program, you need basically to collect data on a set of beneficiaries and the comparison group, and use the standard methodology to assess the impact of a program, to what extent really benefit the beneficiaries. So you need to do a proper data collection on the ground. With machine learning, we try to basically, as I said, we try to use an innovative way to use this data. And while traditional impact evaluation question answer whether an intervention had an effect, let's say irrigation had an impact, with machine learning, you can predict what are the characteristics, for which type of farmers, that intervention was most successful. So actually, not just whether an intervention is impactful, but also for whom. If for a policy perspective, this is extremely important for IFAD, but also for others, because we may need in the future optimized policies, because we have budget constraints, and we know we can't evaluate everything, and maybe sometimes we have to target our effort, and this is a very good tool for policy making. So, as I said, also I want to add that IFAD does not evaluate all projects in its portfolio. There is a budget constraint. We evaluate only 15% of our project. We have about 200 projects every 3 years, and this is why we need to use this data and bring more insights. We need to complement the data analyst toolbox and use more technologies. I hope I answered the question. Over.
Thank you, Alessandra. And Keith.
I just want to just kind of completely echo what Julian said. We have exactly the same modus operandi, the same approach for anything that has to do with locus, and obviously, as I mentioned, that's one of the reasons why we work with universities rather than with commercial companies, because they also have that same belief in terms of open data and public goods. Over to you.
Right, thank you. Now listen, I'd like to call on Parmesh. Are you there, Parmesh? Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm there.
Great. Listen, Parmesh, you're spearheading the World Bank's effort to bring these digital technologies down to the field and result in, improve our outcomes in terms of healthy people, healthy planet, and healthy economies. Tell us a little bit about how you see the interface between public and private in the context of the discussion we've been having today?
So I think I really see merit in what Keith and Julian are saying for certain public data for public decision making. And I think, but I still feel that actual service delivery solutions in terms of farmer services, whether it is finance availability, whether it's inputs availability, whether it's market access, will develop more in the private sector domain. So clearly in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, we have a lot of innovative startups working with us and developing very creative solutions for delivering service.
Parmesh, you're breaking up. I don't know if you got further away from the mic or what, but you have a very hard time hearing you all of a sudden. Parmesh, are you there? Were others having a hard time hearing Parmesh as well?
Yes, I couldn't hear.
Yes,
Yep.
couldn't hear him.
Give you another minute or two. In the meanwhile, does anyone want to ask a question to any of our panelists today? Okay, well, I'll ask another question. So, should an organization like the World Bank be investing money in creating things like open soils data sets so that everyone in the world can access soil information for a country, say, like Nigeria? Now, Nigeria is a very interesting example because it so happens that the soil data has been provided to the government. It was collected by a company called OCP, and the database was provided to the government, but the government has not made it publicly available. And very interested to hear people's views on the role of the World Bank in that kind of a situation. Parmesh, are you still offline? Okay, so we still can't hear Parmesh. So do any of the panelists have any reactions to that situation I just described in Nigeria, where there's a massive amount of data on the soils across the country, but none of that data is being made available by the government to the public?
Yeah, maybe I could jump in.
Please.
I think if I was a World Bank and I'm investing in something like that, and then the government is not going to make that openly accessible, I wouldn't want to invest in that. To be very frank, let's say, because I think the international organizations and agencies, including the World Bank, we have a very important role in terms of encouraging open data and the use of that free access to that data. And this is basic data. You know, soils data is very, very basic data that can be used for so many different things. And I think we have to promote that agenda. And I think by you know, in the situation that you described for Nigeria, that's extremely unfortunate, in fact, that you know that is happening. And it would be you know, soils data is so valuable for so many things, including locusts, of course. So and of course, World Bank, you have tremendous resources, and you know you do have tremendous authority and as well to kind of steer countries and governments into the direction of you know, global public goods and open data access policies. Over.
Yeah, so just to clarify one thing, Keith, and everyone. So a private company out of Morocco invested in building the database and gave it to the government of Nigeria. The bank hasn't actually financed any of this work. And the question is, so the data is sitting there, and if a government asks the World Bank to finance something similar, can the World Bank actually say, no, we won't do it unless it's made publicly available? And that's an interesting question when it's their money that's being used, because it's a loan, not a grant.
Yeah, I still think you could.
Well, so right, but it has to do more with I absolutely agree with the principles of trying to convince them of doing the right thing and the belief in open data, which we feel very strongly about. But it goes back to saying, well, so all the source code and everything that the government of Nigeria is using should be made publicly available also and open. Parmesh, can you come back on?
Yeah, Julian, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me now?
I can hear you well. Go ahead.
Okay. So what I was trying to say is that I think we need a hybrid approach. Some things which are required for public decision making, I think, need to be developed in more a kind of a data platform, which is a public data platform. But what we are seeing now from our work in Africa and many other countries is that there is a whole new type of ectech startups which are coming in, who are developing very innovative products and services, basically to deliver services to farmers, and which are on inputs, on linking to markets and linked to others. And I think we have to find a way by which a part of that data is made available to them to develop innovative products and services which cannot be developed in the public sector domain. So I think we need to find a way by which we can protect the availability of data platforms for public decision making, the kinds of things which Keith and Julian are doing, which I don't think private sector will be able to develop a commercial product on that. But on the number of other things which have to do with service delivery, extension, advisory, we need to develop products. We need to encourage the development of an AgTech, as it has happened in case of fintech. Fintech is now almost universal. The reason why financial inclusion has increased exponentially to the kind of segment we are talking about is only because of the development of the private fintech initiative. Now, similar initiative on AgTech also has to develop as we go forward. So I would say that we keep on investing in public data platforms for public decision making, but also take a part of that data platform and make it available to the private developers of products and services. That will see a revolution in terms of changing the lives of many smallholders who will get services in a very different way. Like developing, in COVID-19 situation, we have some of these startups delivering courier services to fertilizers at the farmer's doorstep, or they are now arranging tractors and mechanized services at farmer's doorstep. And so I think these are the things which are not possible through pure play public service delivery products. We need to have a good combination to use data primarily for public good, for public decision making, but also carve out a niche for the data to be available for other people to develop products and services. This is our current, thinking. I think from what we see now in Kenya and other places, we have identified, we have done a study, we have found there are 178 scalable such innovative startup companies in Africa, which can really revolutionize the way agriculture services are offered in Africa. I'll stop at that.
Great. Huge thank you, Parmesh. And an even bigger thank you to our three panelists, Julian, Keith, and Alessandra. Big thank you to Amy as well, to our two discussants, Harsh and Chris, and of course, Astrid and Vivek for pulling this off. A big thank you to everyone, and look forward to seeing people next week at the same time. Signing off. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.